Take heart, my friend, we'll go together this uncertain road that lies ahead, our faithful God.
There's a book called Good Morning, Holy Spirit. And he talks about, he's like, when you eat alone, pull up a chair for the Holy Spirit, because you're not alone.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. So essentially that's what I do. I eat alone, but I pull up a chair for the Holy Spirit. I'm like, come have, because he's a friend.
Yeah. I tell people, when we get to the point that we can enjoy being alone with God, then we actually begin to enjoy being with people. Because when we're not comfortable or really enjoy being with God, talking to him, then being with people, it's like, are they going to love me or not? Am I going to look stupid, or am I going to say look foolish, or what? And so we're kind of afraid. But when we get to the point that we know God that well, that we it's good to be with him alone, then when we were with people, I can enjoy them because it doesn't make as big of an issue whether they're going to like me or not.
Yeah, your hope doesn't lie in other people.
Yes, because I'm more secure with the Lord.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's what's been happening to you.
Yes.
That's what started happening to you and still happening to you, even more so.
Yeah, and even last year when I first started coming, it was like, I think we've talked about this, but it kind of felt like my entire life I had been building on a shaky foundation. Anything would happen, anything small, like, I don't know, I broke a glass and it was like such a huge reaction, like everything was so dramatic because it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. But that's the way I had lived for so long. Everything was the last straw because there was no peace. There was just a lot of confusion and darkness.
Which is, another thing that, if I can pause there, people that have gone through abuse and live in a home where love is lacking, for lack of a better word, but there's so intense experiences. Rape obviously is super intense in the soul, continued abuse, and so everything is like hypersensitive. Like you say, I break a glass, you're like, something like, emergency.
Yes.
Everything feels like that because there's the wounds are fresh, they're open, they're fresh, they're there, so everything feels with such intensity.
Yeah, you live like in a perpetual state of fight or flight.
Yes.
Yes. And that does something to a person. And over the last, I think just before we started the podcast, we talked about how I lost a bunch of weight. It actually started with researching how to lower my cortisol levels. And, because as I mentioned, you live in that heightened state for so long, like your body's just like, oh, okay, like everything is alarms,
and this is part of the PTSD, trauma all the time.
And that's all you see, and and that was very difficult. So I'm hearing a little bit of what you have to say and how to apply it, and I'm like, how do I do that? Like, I don't know anything, and it was like I was scrambling, like, oh, okay, like I know what to do now, but like, how do I do it? And like, how do I apply this? And I wanted to do everything so fast. It was like drinking water from a fire hydrant because, you feel like that little bit of excitement. It's like, okay, well, there's hope. Like, I just have to like do this and this and this and this. And so yeah, mostly just excitement to get to know the Lord more. But it did not come easily. And I mean, it still doesn't, but at that point, as I mentioned, it was like I had to re-break everything that I had built and lay it on a firm foundation, which is God, and just starting to rebuild everything, starting last year. And it's been such a process. Even when the accident happened, I had cut off all contact with my mom and my brother because
very toxic.
Yeah, even to that point, we had maintained a relationship because, again, family first. You can't just stop talking.
And that's
to
all
family.
I have.
Yeah. And so I ended up cutting off all communication. And I mean, it's difficult because she's still my mom. There's still
Right, of course.
that connection there.
Of course.
So it's very hard, and I'm doing all of this, and I'm just so overwhelmed. Using work, because it's 24-hour shifts. So I would stay for like 3-4 days at a time.
Wow.
2 to 4 days. I think at one point I worked 106 hours straight just to avoid going home and dealing with things. And obviously it didn't help anything else because,
Right.
physically I'm not well. Spiritually, I'm rebuilding. Emotionally, I'm a mess.
Yeah. It's not a flip of a switch.
No, it's not.
It's a process of working through things. And one of the things that should happen is that in that process, you start building healthy relationships as you work through things, because you're able to share with someone and they give you feedback. You're like, oh, this and that. And there's something very powerful about sharing what's inside of us with someone and someone understanding. And then they share with you and you understand them. That's building of relationship.
Yes.
A trusting, healthy relationship, which is what we all long for. Yeah. We all are starving for. And why is that? Well, because we're made in the image of God. And God is a relational being, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And they live in absolute perfect unity of relationship. And we're made in His image, so we were created for that. So we long for that. So, and we build that as we share lives with truth and holiness and love. So I think that's why God takes time, because this is the very stuff that He uses to build relationships, loving, healthy relationships.
Yeah, and even here, I started to make friends here, and it's kind of just, at first it was really difficult because I'm not one to, it's very hard for me to make friends. And I know it's
even that, why is it difficult? Because it's difficult for most people. It's difficult because we don't know whether they're going to accept us or not. We don't know how they're going to react with what's inside of us. So it's like, and they too are afraid. So it's tough.
Yeah.
That's why many people, it's easier to go to the bar, have a few drinks, all the inhibitions are gone.
Yeah.
Okay, we begin to share, but it's unhealthy because there's no long-term truth that deals with what's in there. Yeah. We just share, it feels good. And I tell people they end up in bed together, and then the next morning they're like, who are you?
Yeah.
But that's why, because we all long for those relationships, but they need to be healthy, loving, holy relationships.
But like you say, it's very hard to connect with someone, or when you're not good with being alone with God, it's hard to make friends because you think like all those things, they're going to judge me and whatnot. Like, you feel like, oh, okay.
And they're afraid too.
Yes.
They too are like, oh.
Yeah. And I went to the retreat here. And after that, I kind of started to talk to everybody a little more. I'm like, okay, I'm settling in. And it's been amazing. So I know I left for a couple months this year. So my friend took her life on January 1st of this year. And I remember, just not wanting to come because I didn't know how to deal yet. Like, it didn't feel real.
And this friend had been a lifelong friend, or you had just met? Or?
We met a freshman year of high school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I had known her for some time. We played softball together. She ended up becoming a paramedic as well.
Wow.
Yeah, so she took her life earlier this year, and there's certain aspects of how it happened and what led her to that kind of resonated with me, because I had been on this walk for about a year at this point, 1 year and 2 months, but I was still struggling a lot with thoughts of suicide. And I remember feeling that pain from what she had done, and I kind of thought to myself, like, how could I do this to someone else? You know, how could I do this to my friends, my family, to God ultimately too, because He's the one who gives you life. He's the only one who can take it. And it's a betrayal to a child of His too. So I took a couple of weeks to myself to just kind of process everything, and I was still attending virtually, but you know that there was just something looming over me that I couldn't come in. And then after those 2 weeks, I was like, well, how could I go back? Like, I already missed 2 weeks. And I mentioned this because I feel like a lot of times people leave the church and like, well, how could I go back? You know, I've been gone for so long. Like, they're going to judge me. They're going to say something, you know, how's it going to look? But it's not like that. It's really not like that. And
I suspect that, and I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you came back and you heard some more truth, it's like, okay, yes, this is why I came back.
Yeah. So it was like I didn't want to hear it. That's really what it felt like. Yeah, it felt like I didn't want to hear it. Like, I don't need to listen to that right now. But it was exactly what I needed to.
You mean when you were staying away?
Yes.
That's what you were thinking. I don't want to hear it.
Yes. But of course, that's exactly what I needed to hear. And I ended up going or attending another church in Brownsville virtually as well. And because I was just, you know, trying to figure out what was happening a little bit in my personal life, a little bit what had happened with her. A lot of things had come up, but one thing that I tried to stay consistent was still listening to, even if it was virtually, you know, just still attending, even though I really didn't want to. Deep down in my pit, as you know, we're imperfect. So
no, and I'm wondering, and I'm not sure, but what comes to my mind is that maybe this was a way to. There was anger towards God, possibly. I don't want to listen to your word. Look, my friend took her life. Why would I? Without even knowing that, I'm not saying that that's what's happening, but we all react to whoever we think is in authority. When something happens, we get angry, you know, and that is common. It's expected. It's even legitimate when because we're limited beings. We don't know tomorrow. Only God knows tomorrow. So when something happens that we don't know, we get angry, you know, and that's one of the things that I also, in my own life, going through darkness and being angry with God and coming to the realization that God can handle all my being, my rage, my fear, everything about me. And that's just so great to know, because I think all of us have that sense of, can you handle all of me? I don't know if you can handle all of me, so I'm not going to share everything with you. We all have that because, well, that's what we've experienced. Look, you told your mom and she couldn't handle it, right? When you first told her. And so people can't, so if we experience that repeatedly, where people can't handle us, but that's why we keep it inside.
Yeah.
But when we come to the point to realize that God can handle me, and I'm able to share with Him completely, that is so wonderful.
Yeah.
You know, I remember learning this back many years ago in Psalm 22. The psalmist says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I thought, that's David. That's King David. He wrote that Psalm 22. And I thought, how could David say that to God? God had helped him countless of times. I thought, man, if I was God, I'd slap him silly. Like, what do you mean? I have abandoned you. Tas, you know. But then it came back. It's like, wait a minute. Not only did God allow David to say that, but to write it down and then put it in his Bible for thousands of years. God was telling David, I can handle you, even if you're angry with me, even if you don't understand. I can handle you. I understand.
Yeah.
Wow, God can take all of me. And of course, Jesus said that on the cross himself. My God, why have you forsaken me? So to me, that shit says we can totally open up to God. Totally.
Yeah.
And that makes for a very, very rich relationship.
And I was angry. I definitely was angry, but at myself for some reason. And at her a little bit too,
Of course.
And, because I mentioned I had my own struggle with it. And honestly, since that point, I really can't even imagine doing something like that. So, I mean, I hate to word it this way, but it was almost like God was telling me, like, that's what you want? Like, that's what you want to happen? And I was so angry at myself, like how, I mean, for a myriad of reasons, like one, why didn't I reach out to her? Like, why did I let our relationship kind of like dissipate a little bit,
right?
Because life gets busy and
right. And you're wrestling with so much yourself.
Yeah.
And
and of course, I mean, Rocio, when you saw her, she looked like the happiest person in the world. Even when they told us it was her, it was like, there's no way. Like, there's just no way, not her. So just a lot of confusion, a lot of anger. And that was the first time I had ever experienced anything like that.
Which again, pause there. You say you look at her, she was happy as happy can be. And yet there was something deep inside that was massively wrong. That was troubling.
Yes.
And so for us to see, like, people can smile, but what's really going on inside? Yeah. And that's where, again, rich relationships can make a big difference, because there can be this openness of what's really there. So, and of course, we're not God, so we're limited. Like you say, we're getting busy, we have work, we're wrestling with our own wounds, our own stuff, and so we neglect certain relationships. Then that was like, why didn't I reach out to her? Why can't I be there?
And one thing that I think we talked about, love. That's what we've talked about in the last couple of weeks. Just loving one another, just to the best of our abilities, the way God calls us to love one another. I think a lot of times we, like you said, we're just so busy with our own lives that we miss certain signs. Because even when I was working, I kind of got a little bit of burnout, and I was easily irritated. I was just angry all the time. And I remember my friend telling me, like, I remember when you came in, you were so happy and like outgoing. What happened? Like, and because I had heard, people were saying like, oh, Bryana this, like Bryana is angry now and whatnot. And I did tell him, I'm like, did anybody think to ask me how I was doing? I was actually going through a really hard time, and I didn't even realize that I had such a change in my attitude. But if someone had just asked me like, hey, are you okay? And I think we forget that a lot.
Yes. Well, the truth starts coming out of what's really in there, and it's not pretty. It's not pretty. It can be very, very ugly and painful and shameful. And so that's going to be, but those reactions of sadness or fear or anger are more realistic than happy, and I'm fine, thank you, fun person. That's not realistic. When we see what happens to people's lives, and this is what you've gone through, so many go through similar experiences, many darkness, and so when that starts coming out, well, of course I'm going to be angry. Of course I'm going to be hurt. Of course I'm going to be different, because now I'm living more realistically with what has happened. But now, as we live more realistically and apply biblical truth, then there can be a healthy healing. So that then when there is an enjoyment or something, it's the real thing. It's not a fake thing.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and I suspect this is what's happening with you, that you were this happy person, your reality started coming out. It's like, "Ugh."
Yeah.
But now there seems to be some healing that's happening there.
Yeah. Actually,
And the suicide kind of helped you kind of get more clarity with yourself.
yes. There's definitely levels to it. I never ever imagined to be the person I am, like right now, sitting here today. It still amazes me. Obviously, like I know I still have a lot to go. There's still a lot to learn, and I could definitely be closer to God. But you know, if you asked me even 2 years ago, like that this would be who I would become, I wouldn't have believed you. But that's how God works. It wasn't until I fully gave my life to him. Like I remember I was in my living room, just completely distraught. I was struggling with trying to rebuild everything last year. And I was like, I'm tired. Like, I'm done. Like, I'm done fighting. Like, like fighting with him, like fighting the truth, fighting.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't want it. You can take it.
Yeah, it is a battle.
Yes.
It is. There's no way around it. It is a battle. And you know, this is one of the reasons why I think God, in his infinite wisdom, gave what's in the Old Testament is called the Sabbath rest, where you take time to process life, to concentrate on him and what he has done and what we have experienced and how God might have been involved and how people, you know, processing people's relationship with people and where they're at. And so there's this working through things. As opposed to just work. Okay, fun, work, and no process of what's really there. And that takes a lot of work. And that's why I think he gave us rest. And I mean, even biologically, the studies have shown that, you know, you had good night rest, well, you're going to be better, you know.
Yeah.
You know, you have your rest that you're supposed to have. And so even spiritually, you battle through things. And you need rest because it can be overwhelming.
It was very overwhelming. And at that point, you know, it felt like a breaking point. But it was actually the beginning of something far greater. You know, in that moment, I'm like, I give up. Like, I'm done. I don't want it. Like,
this is exhausting.
Yeah. And to me, it felt like I was breaking, like, okay, like, you know, I'm giving up, like, but really what it was just me leaving it at God's feet and just like, okay, you have the control. Like, I'm not in control. There's nothing I can do. And in that moment, it feels like defeat for I guess my flesh, but you know, like in that moment, it felt like defeat. Like, okay, I'm defeated. Like, I'm giving up.
I have failed, or
yes,
whatever. Yeah.
But what it really was the beginning of my trust in God and like allowing him to work
and being restored in a healthy way.
Yes. Yeah. Just
I tell people, look, we go through things and it's like we get this big infection, right? And how do we deal with that infection? Well, some people say, that's ugly. You know what? Let's just wrap it around with gauze. And then maybe put like initials and, you know, decorate it. Oh, look, it looks great. But we haven't dealt with the infection. And so then it gets worse and worse. Oh, well, put a bigger bandage. Make it, you know, put all kind of stuff on there. No. When it gets like that, we have to take everything off, all the bloody stuff, and then clean it. Like, you know, this is ugly. This is hard. Clean the wound to get to the bottom. And so then start healing in the right way. Put the right medicine in there. Take care of it. Keep it clean. And so it is spiritually. That sometimes we have to dig and dig and dig to get out all the pus and all the stuff that's there. And it's painful, it's ugly, it's shameful. But then there can be that healing of biblical truth that God is with you and you begin to heal. And now there's a healthy restoration.
Yeah. And, when I mentioned that I felt like there was something missing, what was missing was my willingness to really just allow God to take control of my life and allow him to heal instead of me doing this to make it better, or doing that, or,
Right.
like thinking that I could do things to make it better. But it was quite the opposite. It was
Letting
like,
God do it.
yes, like acknowledging and realizing that only he can do it. And really, I have a friend that I met in 2019, and I recently spoke to him, and he stopped me mid-conversation. He's like, Bryana, he's like, I don't even recognize you anymore. He's like, I remember when I first met you to how you're talking right now. He's like, man, I would have never guessed. And I was like, me either, but here we are. But that's just, only God can do that. That was really my only response. I was like, it ain't me.
Now, even though we haven't said it, but your description tells me that part of what God has used is community. Some certain individuals that have been in your life that have brought truth to you, and even coming, to church, you say, well, I began to develop some other relationships at the retreat, coming back. There's been this healthy community that's been there for you. Not everyone, but some have really been a part of your life.
Oh, absolutely. Even when I made the decision to come back after that little break, it was the community that I was like, I have to go back. Like, they're my family.
There you go.
It feels like family.
It is.
Like you're in God's family now, which is far greater than anything else I've ever experienced. Sundays is my favorite day.
Isn't it amazing?
It is. I love it. I'm like, okay, well, what are we going to learn today?
Yeah. And the thing is, church is supposed to be that community where you get refreshed, you get encouraged by fellow believers, you maybe get challenged, but there's truth that's supposed to penetrate, and it feels healthy, wholesome, nourishing. That's the way it's supposed to be. It's not this social club that you go for an hour. Okay, yeah, hi bye, and okay, I did my thing. That feels good. No, it's supposed to be people connecting.
There's something so beautiful about worshiping in a group. I think that's the part, like, and it's even sweeter that I know that everybody around me shares the same values and wants the same truth. Like, we're all here for God.
Yes.
And we just so happen to have all these connections and family and community. But I already had very few friends, but even still, like in the last few months, I have lost contact with most of them. And I think that if you had asked me even a year ago, I would be distraught. Like, they're my friends, But now I kind of see, I'm like, okay, God is pruning, God is removing relationships that are not, that are not bringing me closer to him. And that's kind of how I feel about the job now too, because working the hours that I did in the environment that I did, doing the things that I do, going into dangerous situations and trying to make light of serious situations just to cope, just a lot of unhealthy habits, and I think my career choice directly reflects where I was at in my spirit as well.
Well, if we go back to say, why? And this doesn't have to, I'm not saying that this is it, but there can definitely be a connection because, as we said earlier, you grew up in such a situation where intensity, chaos and intensity. I mean, sexual rape and whatever, all that intensity. So what? Oh, ambulance. Oh, accidents. Oh, intensity. And now that you're growing, it's like, wait a minute. I don't have to have that adrenaline all the time.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel. Don't get me wrong. I loved what I did. I still love being a paramedic. It's just everything that comes with it as well. I just really felt like it was taking me away from who I was. It was like a battle, you know. And as you've mentioned in some services, like you can't be in the middle. Like you're either one side or you're the other. And it felt very much like I was being tugged in both ways. Obviously, I want to choose my walk with Christ above all, but you know, this is my livelihood. So, and again, this is where that accident was such a blessing in disguise, because I think had I not been in that accident, I would have not made the choice to go back to school. I would have still been, and not because, you know, if it's God's plan, then it'll come to fruition regardless.
Right.
But it could have taken me longer. I would have been more resistant to it, or just because I would, again, just using my job as
and kind of stay stuck there.
Yeah.
I got this. I'm experiencing this adrenaline, and I'm getting the money for it, and I'll just dress through it.
Complacency, just you know, like, okay, well, this is what it is, and there's really not much I can do about it. But here comes this random, I don't call it act of God, even though it was
disruption.
It's a disruption in my life. And I remember I was crying right before we went to this call, because I was just having such a hard time. Like in between calls, like I would have myself like a little cry. I'm like, all right, let's get back to it. Wow. So just, it was like everything stopped. Like it almost felt like, and we see things floating like in space and they're in gravity. It was like someone turned off the gravity and everything just dropped. Yes.
A great way to describe it.
Yeah, it was just like everything stopped, and I was like, oh my goodness. Like, because obviously the immediate thing was the pain and just the situation. And it was someone said that it was like a scene out of Black Hawk Down, because everybody's running around. As I mentioned, the patient was in serious condition. So it was just so hectic and crazy. And I'm like, I thought I had broken my leg. I was like, man, I broke my leg. Like my back hurts. Like, you know, what's going to happen? Like I'm going to be out for a while. Just lots of, I was just really worried. I was just extremely worried. And at first it kind of came in waves. Like at first I was like, okay, you know, maybe this is what God wants for me. And, you know, I just have to accept God's will. But as you know, me being so young and experiencing that type of accident where my physical health kind of took a big hit and having to readjust, you know, I was 27 years old walking with a cane, and, you know, that does something to you a little bit. You know, here I go from like, you know, running into fires and, you know, doing all these intense work to, oh man, I can't even get off the couch. So, you know, it was a little difficult in that sense too, but it doesn't get easier. Like just because you start walking with Christ.
Right. Well, that's the thing. To now see life from that perspective, to say, okay, what is Christ doing? What is the Lord doing through this? Whether it's now you see the accident was God disrupting to get you out of the routine of adrenaline. I would like to go back just for a moment to say, you know, when you earlier in the conversation, you said you didn't have a relationship with Christ and now you do. Can you describe that? What do you mean by that? That you know, before I guess you didn't know Christ in such a way, now you do. What's the difference? How would you describe that?
His word. You know, when I was going to the Catholic Church, it was very difficult for me to like sit down and read the Bible. I don't know why it was so like, I'm like, I don't understand this. Like, I don't get it. Maybe it's just not for me. Like, maybe I'm just not supposed to understand it. I don't know. And I would just keep trying. And it just wasn't happening. And I was like, okay, well, all right. And then I started coming here and I was like, okay, well, let's give it another try. And I started little by little, and I started in Matthew. And once again, it was like, they give you the genealogy And that was the first thing I was reading, and I'm like, oh
What is
no,
that for?
yes, like I'm over here like looking up a family tree and like trying to draw it out, like maybe like if I do something extra to try
Right.
to understand it. But I just kept trying, like, because I knew that you have that fire, and it's like a burning desire that like you just can't put it out. Like you're just like, I want more. Like, okay, I don't understand, but I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna try.
Wow.
And so I just kept on doing that. And it just kept on getting better and better. So like what I would do is really how it started was writing down verses on sticky notes. If you look at my desk and my computer, I have like the whole bottom is covered in sticky notes with just like Bible verses. And I have one on my mirror that really that verse, and I mentioned it on Sunday, but that verse, I just love it so much. And it was really what helped me like get out of that depression. But yeah, so that's how I started, just sticky notes. And
so you feel now that you get a lot more from his word than ever before.
Absolutely. Like even now when I read it, I have to close it. I'm like, oh, there's no way. Like I get so excited because I see something and I'm like, I answer questions that I've had for so long. And then here I am reading the Bible and I'm like, why didn't I do this before? Like everything I was looking for was right here. And I just, I was hearing, but I wasn't listening. I was seeing, but I wasn't like really looking at it. So yeah, there's so much in there that just, it absolutely blows my mind.
Wow.
But as I mentioned, I think it's like you have to start with willingness. Like you have to be willing, and like it may feel like you're breaking, but you're not. Like it's the beginning. And
Isn't it amazing to me? I mean, this is another thing that I've realized, that we humans, it's amazing how much we can suffer. Amazing that we think we're that fragile, but we're not.
yeah,
And I don't want anybody to suffer just to learn that, but that's an amazing thing that we can, and God takes us through us when we're walking with Him. I'm hoping that we will have more conversations.
yes,
But to end, I would like for you to think about, okay, what would be, let's say, 2 or 3 things, maybe 4 things, that you would tell some young person that has gone through some similar things or is going through some similar things. What advice, quote unquote, would you give them? What would you encourage them in?
it sounds cliche, but things do get better. You hear that all the time. Things get better. And you keep waiting. You're like, okay, well, where is this better that everybody keeps talking about? It's just not coming. Things do get better. But on the flip side, it's also your choice. Your choice to come to God and give your life to Him. Because that's really when things started to get better for me. And there's this thing where it's like, I'm kind of depressed today. It's like, oh, did you eat? No. Did you go walk? No. Did you drink water? No. Did you sleep? No. It's kind of like that. Like you're sitting there like, oh, why aren't things getting better? It's like, well, did you do anything to make it better? It's like, well, no. So just that, things do get better, but you have to seek the Lord. You have to seek God. It may seem impossible. It may seem extremely difficult, and it is, but you have to press into it. Like you have to feel it, even though it hurts, even though it's painful. Like you have to dig into it, and you have to feel it, and you have to bring it to God. Because if you're not feeling it, then you're not dealing with it. And if you're not dealing with, like, how do you bring it to God when you don't even know what you're bringing to Him? You have to be specific with it.
So I guess what you're saying is, okay, things do get better. You need to turn to God.
Yeah.
but you also need to be willing to look inside and be realistic about what's there.
Yes.
That's what I'm
Yes.
hearing you say.
Yes, you have to be realistic, because I think we tend to lie to ourselves, like, oh, that wasn't that bad, or that wasn't, like, oh, it's just something that's something that I would say all the time. It's just something that happened. It's just a thing.
But it had wounded you deeply.
Yes, and it's kind of like removing yourself. You're still removing yourself from the pain. Like, you don't want to look within. Like, you don't want to be realistic about the situation. Like, it was always like, oh, it's just something that happened. And it wasn't just something that happened.
Right. It had consequences.
Yes.
Massive consequences.
And that too, identifying like all the consequences that come after. And just because it feels good in the moment doesn't mean, I think that young women who go through this, they tend to think that like, oh, well, if I sleep with him, like, it's going to make me feel better, or like, then he'll love me, but at what cost? At what cost to your soul? You're only doing more damage. And I think that's something we don't say at all. Like,
yeah, most people don't understand the
severity.
Young people, the destructiveness of stepping outside of God's design.
Yes.
For everything, whether it's food, sex, whatever.
Yeah.
There's a design, and when we step out of that, it's destructive.
Yeah.
It may feel good for the moment, but in the long run, it's destructive.
And like, rape is sexual immorality. And like, how do you, like, here's the sexually immoral thing that happened that caused all this pain, so I'm going to try to fix it with more sexual immorality. It doesn't work.
Right.
Even though you think it does, even though like that's what society has done, it doesn't help. It only causes more damage, and it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. Like, we tend to deceive ourselves and think like, oh, it's just this one time. I'm only going to go drinking this one time.
Right. That's the Bible calls that the deceitfulness of sin. Sin is deceitful in that it promises life, it promises happiness, but it ends up delivering death. But it is powerfully fun. It's probably addictive because it feels so good for the moment.
Yeah. And there is forgiveness, even though I lived my life a certain way for so long that I thought, like, I'm too far gone. Like, this is it. There's no turning back. There is.
Yeah.
There is deliverance in Christ. And I see now just how much damage I did to myself as well. And now knowing that I am forgiven. I am forgiven despite all those horrible choices I made.
That's the most wonderful thing about Christ.
There is redemption, there's mercy, there's love. Like, everything that you're looking for in the world, in people, in, whoever, it's already there, because even with my dad, I wanted to be daddy's little girl. Like, that was the thing. And I was like, I never had a dad. I do have a dad. I do have a father. I have someone who loves me beyond measure. Like, all that love that I was looking for in my mom, in my relationship, in my relationships, and my friendships.
Right.
It was already there, and I didn't even have to work for it.
Yeah. That's the blindness that we all have, and sometimes the church doesn't help because it doesn't point people to Christ, where there is forgiveness, there is the divine love, but we stay stuck with just the human vertical relationships that can never do it because, well, we're all fallen.
Yeah.
Only God can give us that life.
Yeah, and the more you learn, like I mentioned earlier, like the sword, the more you learn, like, your sword gets bigger and bigger. Even coming here today was a struggle.
I can imagine.
Yes, because all morning, I have this voice in my head just telling me, like, well, who are you? Like, how are you going to sit down and do this podcast? And recognizing that that's the enemy. And I know that now only because I have made my sword and my shield stronger by the Lord's word. And it's easier to identify now. And I was like, no matter what, I'm going. I don't care what you say.
Bryana, thank you so much.
Thank you for having
for
me.
your willingness to do this. I really, really, it's just grateful. So I'm very grateful. It's so encouraging to see a person that has gone through so much, and yet now they have life, and they see their life of what God has done in their life.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that there's going to be many young people that are going to be encouraged to hear your story. So thank you again. Thank you again. And I'm hoping that in the future we do it again.
Yes. Thank you.
My friend, we'll go together this uncertain road that lies ahead. Our faithful God.